ぐにゴミになる包み紙などいらんのだ。重要なのは決断と実行。好機はまずつかめ、邪魔者は即座に排除。やれることは躊躇なく。うわっ！てめえ！
バレット！ stage on my own, but never said my words, wishing they would be heard. I saw you smiling at me. Was it real or just my fantasy? You'd always be there in the corner of this tiny little bar. My last night here for you. Same old songs, just once more. My last night here with you. Maybe yes, maybe no. I kind of liked it your way, how you shyly placed your eyes on me. Did you ever know that I had mine on you? Darling, so there you are, with that look on your face, as if you never hurt, as if you never down. Shall I be the one for you, who pinches you so